Hi, I'm Mitali Perkins, the author of many books for young readers, and also this new book, Steeped in Stories, timeless children's novels to refresh our tired souls. This is a book for grown-ups about children's books. So I don't know about you, but I grew up reading and rereading. I have many favorites from when I was a child, and I reread them even to this day. These include books like Little Women, A Little Princess, The Hobbit, the Narnia books. I loved those books. Now, I encountered them as a new immigrant, and those books helped me to overcome obstacles in my own life, and they helped form me. They helped deeply ingrain in me some of my desires for virtue. Virtues like hope and courage and love. Those were all things I aspired to because of the books that I was reading. Okay, now fast forward to 2021, when we reread those books as adults and we see that they were entrenched in their eras. These books have problems when it comes to race and culture and colonialism. And so we read them and we think, oh, do we just toss them away now? Are they no longer relevant? Well, in this book, Steeped in Stories, I make the case that not only are they relevant, but they're necessary. W.H. Auden said that we aren't fully human until we break bread with the dead. And I think there's something about our culture that is rife with hubris when we think we have the corner on all the answers and all the virtues since the dawn of time in all different cultures, that we in the United States in 2021 know what it is to be virtuous. And so I invite you to join me as I revisit 7 books from my past that I think you might have maybe encountered 1 or 2 of them. And we look at some of the virtues that were deeply ingrained in these books, and we allow them to refresh and to retrain us in a way that people from our present can't do. Now, of course, we don't overlook the flaws in these books. In Steeped in Stories, I treat these authors as uncles and aunties. I don't know if you have an aunt or an uncle who comes to a dinner party and you love them and you make room for them, but they might say something awkward or off or something that sounds really wrong to younger ears. And so that's how I treat these beloved authors of mine. They're my uncles and aunties. They shape me and form me. I want to sit and have a cup of tea with them and enjoy their stories. But I also want to pay attention to the fact that they too, just as I myself am, were entrenched in a particular culture, in a particular generation, and so have their own blinders as well. So I invite you to come and join me as we consider these books and consider these virtues. I think you'll have fun as you read this book and remember the books from your past that shaped you. And my hope is that we can forgive these writers, learn from them, be refreshed by them, and also that those of us who are creating new fiction for kids can take a closer look at our own fiction to see what some of the things that might be embedded in our fiction from the current culture and era, and how we can have the better hearts and eyes to see those flaws and the virtues. So thanks, Boulder Bookstore, for having me do this interview. I'm excited because some of my beloved family members live in Boulder, my sister and her family. I love coming there. I love walking down Pearl Street. Love your store. And I'll be back. I'll be back there for an event, I think in April. So looking forward to seeing you in person. But in the meantime, I thought I'd read you just the beginning parts of Steeped in Stories. And so you can get a feel for what we're talking about in this book. All right, so this is from the introduction. My lifelong love of children's books begins on a humid summer's day in Flushing, Queens. Our family, newly immigrated from Kolkata, India, is unpacking suitcases in a small, stuffy apartment. I am 7 years old, bored of settling in and grumpy. Baba throws one of my older sisters a look and Sonali reaches out a hand. Let's go, she says. We walk 10 blocks to a large, stately building. People are coming and going so freely that I wonder if they all live there. But after my sister signs us up at the front desk, she leads me into a room full of books, and more books. You can choose 7 to take home and read, she tells me. For free? I ask, wide-eyed. You have to return them, she says, but then you get to pick even more. I rarely missed a weekly visit after that. The children's section of the Queen's Public Library felt like Ali Baba's cave. Life grew more stressful, money was tight, our parents argued, my older sisters tested age-old boundaries that constrained the lives of good Bengali girls, but I had a safe retreat. Clutching a book, I slipped out of our bedroom window to the fire escape outside. The sounds, smells, and sights of the city street below me dissipated. I was no longer trapped in chronological time nor in geographical space. I was visiting Jo and her sisters in 19th century Concord, Massachusetts, entering Narnia with Lucy and meeting Mr. Tumnus, sitting in Matthew's buggy as Anne made her way to Green Gables. Perhaps you too remember the magic of vanishing into books as a child. You might have made your escape with a flashlight under the covers in bed or in another secret nook. But a book was your salve of choice. Back then, we consumed stories with both heart and mind engaged, fluidly crossing borders of culture and history, immersing ourselves in many worlds. We grew in the skill of imagining other lives. In her now classic Hornbook essay, Against Borders, Hazel Rochman explains why stories have this mysterious power to build community. They can break down borders. And the way that they do that is not with role models and recipes, not with noble messages about the human family, but with enthralling stories that make us imagine the lives of others. A good story lets you know people as individuals in all their particularity and conflict. And once you see someone as a person, their meanness and their courage, then you've reached beyond stereotype. Out on that fire escape, I was hovering between two worlds, our apartment, which was basically still a Bengali village, and the overwhelming bustle and noise of New York City. Stories reduced the heat of life between cultures into a manageable simmer. It's likely they lowered the stress levels in your childhood as well. Don't you miss the peace that a good story left behind in your soul? Children's books can still do that good work for adults. Think of children's books as literary vodka, author Catherine Rundell writes, in Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise. She argues that children's fiction helps us refine things we may not even know we have lost. Reading it as adults takes us back to a time when new discoveries came daily and when the world was colossal before the imagination was trimmed and neatened. Why then do grown-ups stop reading children's books? I've heard 4 main arguments, but none make sense. Well, you have to keep reading the books to find out my arguments and also to delve into all 7 of the stories. They include, I'll just go over the table of contents with you. First of all, we talk about the elephant in the room, which is the issue of race and culture and power and colonialism. And then I talk about how I define goodness. It's important to define goodness before we start to look for it in stories. And then the next chapter is on Anne of Green Gables. So we look at rigidity and love. So each one has a virtue and a vice. The second one, and the vice is particular to our culture. These are 7 vices, I think, that in 2021 we are all struggling with. So Rigidity and Love, Anne of Green Gables, followed by Alienation and Faith, Heidi by Johanna Spyri, Despair and Hope, Emily of Deep Valley by Maud Hart Lovelace, Pusillanimity, I always have trouble pronouncing that, and Courage, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, or Uncle John Rowland, as his nephews called him, and as I call him in this book, Self-Indulgence and Temperance, Little Women by Auntie Louisa May Alcott, Favoritism and Justice by one of my favorites, A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, also one of the most problematic books we'll look at. And then Rashness and Prudence, The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis, Uncle Jack. So I also offer some tips on consuming and creating children's stories to be a discerning reader in the final chapter of the book. And then in conclusion, we talk about drinking tea with the dead and how important that is. So you can follow me on steepedinstories.com. You can sign up to be part of a group read and pop in and out. We're going to do 1 a month starting in September, and you can join us for as many or as few as you want. But I hope you do pick up a copy of Steeped in Stories at Boulder Bookstore, and let me know that you're reading it. You can find me all over social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Mitali Perkins, Mitali. I'm the only Mitali Perkins on planet Earth, so I'm easy to find. So I'm looking forward to drinking a cup of tea with you and talking about classics, both the flaws and the virtues that we can learn from these stories. Thanks. Thanks, Boulder Books. Bye.